Margaret Chen looked at her computer at 11:47 p.m. She was tired from another long day looking for a job. At 50 years old, she had 25 years of experience as an engineer. She had just received her 127th rejection email. This one was different. It was not the usual polite, "We decided to hire someone else." This one was mean. "We are looking for fresh talent with modern skills." Fresh talent. At 50, after building bridges that still stand today, after leading teams that designed systems still working in big cities, after teaching many young engineers who now have important jobs at top companies. Margaret closed her laptop and walked to her kitchen window. She looked at the city lights. She had no idea that this terrible moment would become the start of a billion-dollar business. In the next 20 minutes, I will tell you the amazing true story of how rejection became Margaret's greatest gift. How being too old for regular jobs led her to create something that changed an entire industry. And most importantly, how her story shows that sometimes when a door closes in your face, life is pushing you toward your real purpose. At the end of this story, you will understand why rejection is often not the end. It is a new path to your destiny. Margaret Chen never thought she would be without a job at 50. For 25 years, she worked at Morrison Engineering, one of the best companies in the country. She started as a young engineer fresh from MIT and worked her way up to senior principal engineer. She led projects worth hundreds of millions of dollars. She designed buildings that could survive earthquakes in California. She created new bridge systems that made construction 40% faster. She developed safety rules that became standards for the whole industry. Her team respected her, clients trusted her, and her work was perfect. Margaret Chen was the kind of engineer that other engineers wanted to become, but the industry was changing. Morrison Engineering was bought by TechBuild Corp., a company obsessed with digital transformation and new methods. The new management team was young, fresh from business school. They believed that experience was a problem, not a good thing. They spoke about disrupting traditional engineering and using AI-powered solutions. Margaret could see the problem during her first meeting with the new team. Brad, the 28-year-old VP of operations, looked at her resume and said, "Your experience is impressive, but we want to move away from old-school engineering. We need people who understand modern technology and can change quickly." Old school. The words hurt. Margaret had been changing with technology her entire career. She had moved from hand-drawn plans to computer systems, from paper calculations to advanced software, from traditional project management to digital tools. She had reinvented herself many times, but apparently that was not enough. The restructuring happened 6 months later. Margaret and 47 other senior engineers lost their jobs in what the company called right-sizing for the future. They received good severance packages and great recommendations, but the message was clear. Their time was over. Margaret spent the first month in denial. She was Margaret Chen. She had recommendation letters from CEOs, positive feedback from satisfied clients, and a resume that read like an engineering hall of fame. Finding a new job would be easy. She was wrong. The first few rejections were easy to explain. Maybe the job was not quite right. Maybe they found someone with more specific experience. Maybe the timing was not perfect. But as the rejections increased, a pattern appeared. Companies loved her experience until they met her in person or saw when she graduated. Then suddenly, they were going in a different direction. The job market had changed. Companies wanted digital natives and innovative thinkers. They wanted people who could move fast and break things. At 50, Margaret was seen as someone who moved carefully and built things to last. In the new economy, that was apparently a disadvantage. The worst rejection came from a startup that desperately needed her expertise. They were building a revolutionary construction platform, but could not figure out how to ensure structural safety in their designs. Margaret's experience was exactly what they needed. She passed the technical interview easily, solved problems their team had been struggling with for months, and presented solutions that could save them millions in development costs. But she did not get the job. The feedback was devastating. "We love your technical skills, but we are concerned about cultural fit. We are a young, dynamic team, and we need someone who can keep up with our pace and energy." That night, Margaret sat in her home office surrounded by awards, certificates, and photos from 25 years of engineering excellence. She felt invisible, unimportant, forgotten. The industry she had helped build no longer wanted her. At 50, she was being thrown away like old equipment. The rejections kept coming, each one making Margaret feel worse about herself. After 8 months of searching, she had applied to 127 jobs and received 127 rejections. Her savings were getting smaller, her severance money was almost gone, and for the first time in her adult life, Margaret Chen was facing money problems. The worst part was not the money. It was feeling like she did not exist. At networking events, younger professionals looked right through her. Recruiters called her back less often. Job descriptions more and more included phrases like "recent graduate preferred" or "looking for fresh perspectives." Margaret realized she was experiencing age discrimination, but proving it was nearly impossible. She tried everything. She updated her resume, removing graduation dates and early career experiences to look younger. She learned new software, took online courses in artificial intelligence and machine learning, and even hired a career coach who specialized in mature professionals. Nothing worked. The breaking point came during an interview at a medium-sized company. Margaret had made it to the final round for a senior engineer position. The technical interview went perfectly. She solved complex problems that had confused their team for weeks. But during the culture fit interview, the 35-year-old hiring manager asked, "How do you stay current with technology?" We find that experienced professionals sometimes struggle to adapt to new tools. Margaret's response was calm and professional, but inside she was angry. She had been adapting to new tools for longer than this manager had been alive. She had literally watched the engineering profession change from slide rules to supercomputers. But somehow her ability to adapt was being questioned because of her age. She did not get the job. The feedback was the same as always. "Excellent technical skills, but we are looking for someone who brings fresh energy to the team." Fresh energy. As if experience and wisdom were somehow draining. That evening, Margaret's daughter called. "Mom, maybe it's time to think about early retirement. You have worked hard your whole life. Maybe the universe is telling you to take a break." Early retirement. The phrase made Margaret feel sick. She was not ready to retire. She loved engineering, loved solving problems, loved building things that mattered. But the industry was making it clear that they were ready for her to retire. Margaret began to doubt everything about herself. Maybe she was too old. Maybe her skills were outdated. Maybe she could not adapt to the modern workplace. The woman who had once confidently led teams of 50 engineers now questioned whether she could contribute anything valuable to the profession she loved. The financial pressure was getting worse. Margaret had always been good with money, but 8 months without income was taking its toll. She began considering jobs outside engineering, office jobs, consulting work, even part-time retail work. Anything to pay the bills and feel some sense of purpose. But the most painful part was the loneliness. Margaret's identity had been built around her work. She was an engineer. It was not just what she did, it was who she was. Without that role, she felt lost, without purpose, invisible. Friends from her old job had moved on, networking events felt useless, and professional conferences reminded her of everything she had lost. Late at night, Margaret would sit at her computer, looking at job websites and wondering what had gone wrong. She had done everything right, worked hard, stayed current, delivered results. But somehow, the industry had decided she was no longer valuable. At 50, Margaret Chen felt like her career was over before she was ready for it to end. It was during Margaret's darkest moment That inspiration came in the most unexpected way. She was helping her neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, whose elderly mother needed wheelchair accessibility changes to her home. Margaret offered to help with the engineering assessment, partly to be kind and partly because she desperately needed to feel useful again. What should have been a simple ramp installation became a nightmare of bureaucracy, incompetent contractors, and overpriced solutions. The quotes Mrs. Rodriguez received were crazy: $25,000 for changes that Margaret knew should cost half that amount. Worse, the timeline was 6 months, because contractors who specialized in accessibility changes were completely booked. As Margaret looked at the problem more deeply, she realized this was not just one case. The entire home modification industry was broken. Elderly people and families with disabilities faced enormous problems. Contractors who did not understand accessibility requirements, engineers who charged high prices for basic changes, and a completely broken system with no quality control. But Margaret saw something else. She saw an opportunity to use her engineering expertise in a way that could really help people. More importantly, she saw a market that was completely underserved and growing rapidly as the population got older. That night, Margaret could not sleep. Her mind was racing with ideas. What if there was a platform that connected homeowners needing accessibility changes with good contractors and engineers? What if the entire process could be made simpler, standardized, and affordable? What if technology could solve the problems that were making these changes so expensive and time-consuming? Margaret started researching. She discovered that the accessibility modification market was worth $15 billion every year and growing by 12% each year as baby boomers aged. But the industry was broken up, unregulated, and filled with contractors who overcharged because families were desperate and had few options. She also discovered something personal. Her own mother, now 78, had been struggling with mobility issues, but had not told Margaret because she knew the changes would be expensive and complicated. This problem was affecting millions of families, but nobody was talking about it because it was seen as a normal part of aging. Margaret began drawing ideas for a complete platform. It would include good contractors, standard pricing, quality guarantees, and simple project management. Engineers like herself could provide remote consultations and oversight, ensuring quality while keeping costs down. The platform could use technology to automate much of the assessment and design process, making changes faster and more affordable. But Margaret's real breakthrough came when she realized that this was not just about accessibility changes. The same platform could handle any type of home engineering project: structural changes, earthquake retrofitting, energy efficiency upgrades, smart home installations. The market was enormous, but it was broken up and inefficient because there was no central platform connecting homeowners with qualified engineers and contractors. For the first time in months, Margaret felt excited about work again, but she also felt scared. She had never started a business. She had no experience with technology platforms, marketing, or venture capital. At 50, was she too old to become an entrepreneur? Margaret spent weeks researching the startup world and quickly realized why she was having doubts. The entrepreneurship world was even more youth-obsessed than traditional engineering. Success stories featured 20-something founders who dropped out of college to change the world. Venture capitalists openly said they preferred to invest in young founders because they were seen as more energetic, adaptable, and ambitious. But Margaret also discovered something encouraging. Many successful entrepreneurs had started their companies later in life. Ray Kroc was 52 when he founded McDonald's. Laura Ingalls Wilder was 65 when she published her first Little House book. Colonel Sanders was 62 when he franchised KFC. Success in entrepreneurship was not about age. It was about solving real problems with practical solutions. Margaret realized she had advantages that younger entrepreneurs lacked. She understood the engineering industry deeply. She had 25 years of experience managing complex projects and leading teams. She had credibility with contractors and engineers who would be essential partners. Most importantly, she had personally experienced the problem she wanted to solve. The idea began to become a concrete business plan. Margaret would create HomeFlow. a complete platform for home engineering projects. Homeowners could describe their needs, receive automated assessments and estimates, get connected with good professionals, and manage their projects from start to finish. Engineers could work remotely, providing expertise without the overhead of traditional consulting firms. Contractors could access a steady stream of qualified leads and standardized project specifications. Margaret knew that turning her idea into reality would require more than engineering expertise. She needed to learn about software development, user experience design, digital marketing, and business operations. At 50, she was essentially going back to school while simultaneously trying to build a company. She started by taking online courses in product development and lean startup methodology. She learned about minimum viable products, user testing, and agile development. The terminology was foreign, but the basic principles were not so different from engineering project management. Both required understanding user needs, step-by-step design, and careful testing before full implementation. Margaret's first challenge was finding technical co-founders. She went to startup meetups and networking events, but her age made her stand out in rooms full of 20 and 30-somethings. When she pitched her idea, people were polite but skeptical. Several potential co-founders expressed concerns about whether she could keep up with the pace of startup life or relate to modern consumers. The breakthrough came when Margaret met David Kim, a 34-year-old software engineer who was caring for his aging parents. David immediately understood the problem Margaret was trying to solve because he had experienced it firsthand. His parents needed accessibility changes, but the process had been frustrating, expensive, and time-consuming. When Margaret explained her vision for HomeFlow, David saw the potential immediately. David became Margaret's technical co-founder, but their partnership was not easy. David was used to the move fast and break things mentality of Silicon Valley startups. Margaret preferred careful planning and thorough testing. Their different approaches led to conflicts, but they also led to a better product. David's urgency pushed Margaret to launch sooner, while Margaret's caution prevented costly mistakes. Building the initial platform took 8 months and most of Margaret's remaining savings. She hired freelance developers, worked 80-hour weeks, and learned more about technology than she had in the previous 10 years. The process was exhausting, but it was also exciting. For the first time since being laid off, Margaret felt like she was building something meaningful. The first version of HomeFlow was basic, but functional. Homeowners could submit project requests, receive automated estimates based on Margaret's engineering calculations, and get connected with pre-checked contractors. The platform handled project management, communication, and payments, taking a small percentage of each transaction. Margaret's strategy was to start small and prove the concept before seeking major investment. She launched in her local area with just 10 contractors and began marketing to families dealing with aging parents. Word spread quickly in the disability and senior communities because HomeFlow solved a problem that had been ignored by the broader market. The early results were encouraging. Customers loved the transparency, standardized pricing, and project management features. Contractors appreciated the steady stream of qualified leads and simplified administration. Within 6 months, HomeFlow had completed 150 projects with a 96% customer satisfaction rate. But growth required money, and Margaret faced the same age discrimination in the investment world that she had encountered in the job market. Venture capitalists were polite during pitch meetings, but their feedback was consistent. Great idea, experienced team, but concerns about the founder's ability to scale rapidly and adapt to market changes. One particularly frustrating meeting was with a prominent VC firm that specialized in disrupting traditional industries. The 29-year-old principal loved the HomeFlow concept, but questioned whether Margaret could think big enough and move with the urgency that modern markets require. When Margaret pointed out that she had successfully managed $500 million in engineering projects, the principal responded, "That's impressive, but startup scaling is different. It requires a different mindset." Margaret realized she was fighting the same biases that had made her unemployable as an engineer. The startup world's obsession with youth, was preventing investors from seeing the value of her experience and expertise. But Margaret had learned something important from her months of job rejection. Sometimes you have to prove yourself before others will believe in you. Instead of continuing to chase venture capital, Margaret decided to grow HomeFlow using revenue from operations. It would be slower than VC-funded growth, but it would allow her to maintain control and prove that age was an asset, not a liability, in building a successful company. Margaret's decision to grow HomeFlow slowly turned out to be brilliant. While VC-funded competitors burned through millions trying to get customers with expensive marketing campaigns, HomeFlow grew steadily through word-of-mouth referrals and genuine customer satisfaction. Margaret's engineering background became HomeFlow's secret weapon. While competitors struggled with quality control and project management issues, HomeFlow's projects were completed on time and on budget because Margaret had built engineering discipline into every aspect of the platform. Her 25 years of experience managing complex projects translated perfectly to managing a growing technology company. The platform's reputation for reliability attracted the best contractors and engineers. Professionals who had worked with Margaret during her corporate career joined HomeFlow as partners, bringing their own networks and expertise. Margaret's credibility in the engineering community became a massive competitive advantage that younger entrepreneurs could not copy. Within 2 years, HomeFlow had expanded to 5 cities and completed over 10,000 projects. The company was profitable, growing at 40% every year, and had waiting lists of contractors wanting to join the platform. Most importantly, HomeFlow was making a real difference in people's lives by making essential home modifications affordable and accessible. Margaret's age, which had been seen as a problem in the job market, became a powerful asset in entrepreneurship. Customers trusted her because she understood their needs as someone who was also dealing with aging parents. Contractors respected her because she had the engineering expertise to solve complex problems. Investors finally started paying attention because HomeFlow's financial performance was undeniable. The transformation was complete when HomeFlow received its first major acquisition offer. TechBuild Corp., the same company that had laid Margaret off 3 years earlier, offered $800 million to buy HomeFlow. The irony was perfect. The company that had considered her too old for employment now wanted to pay her nearly $1 billion for the business she had built. Margaret declined the offer. HomeFlow was her company, built on her vision and values. But the validation was immense. The 50-year-old engineer who had been rejected 127 times had built something that the industry's largest players desperately wanted. 6 months later, Margaret received a call from Forbes magazine. HomeFlow had been valued at $1.2 billion in its latest funding round, making Margaret one of the few female engineers to build a unicorn company. The journalist asked about her secret to success, and Margaret's answer was simple. "I solved a problem I understood deeply, using experience that younger entrepreneurs don't have yet." The story of Margaret's transformation from rejected job applicant to billionaire entrepreneur spread quickly through business media. She became a popular speaker at conferences, sharing her insights about entrepreneurship after 50 and the value of deep expertise in building successful companies. But Margaret's greatest satisfaction came from the impact HomeFlow was having on families. The platform had helped over 50,000 families make their homes more accessible, safer, and more comfortable. Elderly people were able to age in place with dignity. Families with disabilities had access to affordable modifications. The problem that had frustrated Margaret during her job search had become the foundation of a business that was changing people's lives. Margaret often thought about that brutal rejection email that had pushed her over the edge 3 years earlier. The company that told her they were looking for fresh talent with modern skills had been right about one thing. They did need fresh talent. They just did not realize that fresh thinking could come from experienced minds who saw problems differently. Today, Margaret Chen is no longer looking for a job. She is the CEO of a billion-dollar company that employs over 500 people. many of whom are experienced professionals who had been discarded by ageist industries. HomeFlow has become a second-chance employer, proving that experience and wisdom are valuable assets in the modern economy. The rejected resume that once represented Margaret's greatest failure had become the foundation of her greatest success. Every rejection had been a redirection, pushing her away from employment and toward entrepreneurship. The doors that closed in her face had forced her to find the window that was always open. She just needed to be brave enough to climb through it. Margaret's story proves that rejection often is not the end of our journey. It is the beginning of our real purpose. Sometimes we need to be pushed out of our comfort zones to discover what we are truly capable of creating. And sometimes, the experience that makes us unemployable in one context becomes the exact expertise needed to revolutionize an entire industry.